Thank you, David. I recommend that you go to the meeting in Alice Springs. Alice Springs is a good place to go, and those people will be very interesting speakers. I will only just introduce Stuart quickly. I won't have what I've written out because we're a few minutes behind. So, as you know, Stuart comes from the South Australian Opera, and after 4 years in New Zealand as the General Director, and we're very fortunate to have him here, so you'll find out why now.
Thank you, Kay. Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Kay, I have to say, it's the most stressful thing sitting on that table with that bell, I tell you. So I'll be very brief in all of this. I'm the artistic director of the State Opera South Australia, and incredibly proud to be. As I was talking to my ex-wife on the phone as I drove here today, you go through that extraordinary bushland on the way here in Memorial Drive, and you think, what a glorious city. So I echo the sentiments of how wonderful it is to actually be in this town. I'm here basically because Adelaide has always been an operatic capital. Now, can I just see a show of hands for a start? How many people have actually been to an opera? Oh, listen, you lot are the ones. I'm delighted to see that. The last time I spoke to a Rotary group was in Parnell in Auckland, and it was 7:30 in the morning, one of those breakfast ones, and I think a quarter of them had been. I'd also went to Waiheke Island as well, and even less had been there. So the reason I'm delighted to be here today is basically to get out and fly the flag for this extraordinary art form called opera that many people deride, and they certainly talk it down, and basically usually because they've never been. So my story is that I grew up on a wheat, sheep and cattle farm in northern New South Wales at a gorgeous little place called Boggabri. And my parents had absolutely no idea what they had in me, the black sheep of the family, so to speak. There was never a moment that I was going to go back on the land, and I always wanted to perform. That's basically the idea. So my father, in his wisdom, sent me to Farrer Memorial Agricultural High School in Tamworth, which was there for the sons of farmers. And there you can become a big fish in a little pond very easily by not playing cricket and not playing football, but by basically singing and dancing and all the rest of it. And by the time you get to puberty, you suddenly realise that actually you've got a career possibly there. I went to university at University of New South Wales, and at that stage was studying law. But as usually happens at university, you spend more time performing in shows than you actually do going to lectures. So it wasn't the most successful time in my young career, but what I did do was discover that Opera Australia, or the Australian Opera as they were called there, were after stage managers. And these were the dark ages when people could actually learn on the job. So I joined Opera Australia on the 5th of January 1978 as the longest title in the company, a trainee assistant stage manager, and literally learnt on the job. And the joy of that was that, of course, you develop this incredible love for the art form. I remember a Road to Damascus moment when a friend of mine literally dragged me to a cinema to see the Ingmar Bergman version of The Magic Flute in 1976. First time I'd ever heard of Mozart, first time I'd certainly ever heard of The Magic Flute, and I thought it was the most extraordinary, transformative experience of my then young life. So I knew that opera had to be something that I needed to do. While at university, I'd also availed myself of student rush tickets that in those days, it was a $5 ticket to see most of the operas that were on at the Sydney Opera House. You had to queue up in the morning to do it. And if you wanted to see Joan Sutherland, it was an $8 investment. So in those incredible times, you saw so many different operas. And not all of them I loved, not all of them I adored at all. And I think that's my point today. You people are our growth industry. We have an audience, we have an ageing population, and we have need of new audiences. Interesting to hear about your strategic plan where you're trying desperately to reinvigorate the idea of Rotary. We're trying to do exactly the same thing with opera, because things have changed. When I was going to the opera as a young man, it was nothing to go to see a Puccini opera called La Fanciulla del West, The Girl of the Golden West. We did it 3 years between 1979 and I think 1987. We did it 3 times. The last time that Fanciulla del West was performed around Australia, you could have shot a cannon through the audience, because unless you're going to Madame Butterfly or Traviata or the Barber of Seville or the operas that many people know, frankly, from cartoons or from advertisements, it's really hard to get an audience for opera these days. We have a very loyal audience, but we need to build that. We, as a company, have succeeded here in Adelaide, I think, in finding a new audience that came to our Carmen in the Square, that you might remember last year, which was in Victoria Square, where we basically took over the central square. And that whole idea was to try and get people to come to an opera, to experience it for the first time in an unusual space. And that worked for us. We had 5,000 people, all, thank God, the rain held out. And it was a remarkable night. We have an issue in this city, I think, that particular area is not a curated ground. So it means that anybody can go in and hire Victoria Square. So for the next 2 years, Taste Australia, Taste Adelaide, whatever that's called, have it for most of that period. So we can't get in anymore. So we've got to try and reignite people's excitement of the art form by going to other venues. Last year we also did a wonderful production of a thing called The Cunning Little Vixen, which is a Janacek opera. Again, if we don't do these operas, the great operas of the canon, there is no way that this art form is going to be able to survive. We did it, but about 400 people a night came to it, so 1,200 people all told saw the Vixen. And if you do the maths, nobody would ever do an opera. I mean, the reality is that opera is the most expensive art form that you can possibly have, and the reason it's expensive is because we employ people. So any time that you go to an opera, you're going to see at least 48 singers in the chorus. You're going to see upwards of 70 to 100 orchestral musicians performing every night. Usually the average would be 250 people that are backstage that are either dressing people or they're changing over the scenery or they're moving scenery around. It's an incredibly labour-intensive art form, and one that it's incredibly hard to rationalise that art form. And consequently, we contribute as a company majorly to the economics of Adelaide, and it's something that I believe is not screamed from the rooftops high enough, just how important it is that in New Zealand certainly $4 of every dollar that you spent is brought back to the city, be it in car parking, be it in attendance at restaurants or even babysitters or whatever, but an extra $4 is usually brought back into the community. So it's an art form that I am passionate about. I believe that there are as many different operas as that there are grains of sand. And if you've been to the opera and you haven't particularly found the one that has floated your boat, it just means that you haven't found it yet. So what we try and do each year is to present a balanced repertoire that's going to appeal to as many people as it possibly can. So, for example, I hope to hell this works. This is our 2020 season. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Who's the gentleman that helped me here? There we are. So as I said, we try desperately to get as many different forms of the art form that we can, so that we can, as I say, float people's boat. So what we tried to do this year, we're going next door to the Tennis Centre on the 27th of March to start with a piece called Carmina Burana. Most people would know this. Again, show of hands, who's heard Carmina? There you go. And if you haven't, you've certainly heard the Carlton Draft ad and almost everything else. It's the most used piece of classical music in all advertising. So what we're doing is seating everybody in the southern stand of the Memorial Drive tennis courts, and all the 250 person choir, 70 kids, huge symphony orchestra are going to be performing in front of you. It's a wonderful work, and a work that goes straight to the heart of, I think, one of the other things that this company needs to do, which is to celebrate Australian talent. It's very easy for people to grow up in this country, have a passion, have a talent. They train here and they have to go overseas because nobody can really earn a respectable living in opera in Australia, except me. No. So the idea is, with Camina Burana, we're bringing back a couple of remarkable Australian singers. One of them is a man called Samuel Dale Johnson, who is currently the Figaro of choice and the Don Giovanni and the Onegin at the Deutsche Oper in Berlin. Hasn't performed in Australia in his career, and we're bringing him back to perform one performance in Camina Burana. We also showcase one of the most exciting young operatic talents that comes out of Adelaide, a lady called Desiree Fran, that last year performed the Cunning Little Vixen and among other roles. She is singing the soprano soloist in this. It's the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra in their mighty splendour, and it's a great, visceral, exciting concert, and certainly one that I think would appeal to families. They can come along and have a great time. We follow that. I'm going through these now. There's Desiree God Lover. Okay, it's conducted by Benjamin Northey, one of Australia's most in-work conductors. The next performance we do is a thing called the Barber of Seville. Now, most people would know this from the Rabbit of Seville, the famous Warner Brothers cartoon, Figaro, 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 all that. And it is a madcap, joyous romp that has been directed by a lady called Lindy Hume. Wonderful production. It originated in Opera Queensland, then went to Seattle and all over New Zealand as well. It's mad in the way it's performed, but the joy of it is that, again, we've assembled a wonderful Australian cast. Morgan Pearce, who is currently, well, you may have seen him as Escamillo last year in the Carmen. Brilliant voice, and he's one of those people that you just can't keep him down. I mean, OCD, let me tell you. But he's a great baritone. John Longmuir, as a West Australian singer who mainly works for Opera Australia, is giving his now classic count. A glorious girl called Anna Dowsley, who has won almost every operatic award that Australia has been able to throw at her, comes to perform the role of Rosina. We also include Graham Abbott, who is one of Adelaide's most respected musicians. He is conducting the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra. It's, as I said, a joyous romp and the perfect opera to bring kids to. This is one we prepared earlier. This is a little bit of an excerpt from the New Zealand opera production. So this is what we're going to see here. No, we're not. We're going to do it now, are we? They say that Figaro in this production looks like a love child between Joe Cocker and I think Tim Minchin was the other. So you get the idea, madcap, colourful, joyous piece. We do that for 5 performances in the Festival Theatre. During that time, we also believe that one important thing that the opera company can do is to try and bring people that wouldn't normally come to Adelaide here to sell their wares and to thrill a local audience. They're not able to be here during the festival time, so we're creating our own festival. This is the Les Arts Florissants, which is a French group who specialise in Baroque music. They are bringing their young artist team, Le Jardin they call it, are coming to Adelaide to perform one of Mozart's lesser-known operas called La Finta Giardiniera, written when he was 18, would you believe? Joyous little work, and they're performing for one performance at the Festival Theatre while we're there doing the Barber of Seville. We then have a little bit of a holiday and come back again in August, with a piece called Brand New Day. Now, many people may have seen the film of this, or if you're particularly bold, you would say that you saw the original back in 1997. But it's the first Indigenous Australian musical. It's a story about a young boy basically coming of age and finding his girl, and there's a lot of finding one's roots within the community. It is the most infectious score that you'd ever hope to hear, and is it's on in Sydney at the moment. This is part of Opera Conference, which means it goes around to all of Australia. And it's something that I think we can all celebrate, that it's a moment where we go back to a slightly gentler time in the 1960s to see these kids coming of age. It's a beautiful piece. So that's coming through. How are we going time-wise? Am I all right? Yeah, I'm doing extremely well. Next one is one that I'm particularly proud of. This I directed back in Melbourne at the Victorian Opera in 2015. This is a thing called Sweeney Todd, which was written in 1978. It's one of Stephen Sondheim's most thrilling musical extravaganzas. It's about a demon barber of Fleet Street, of course, that you know, who through a little relationship with a lady called Mrs. Lovett decides that he slits people's throats and she puts them into meat pies, and they become very successful. It's not sort of your usual musical, I might add, but what it is joyous, and it's very, very funny and very black and very moving at the end. It stars a man called Ben Mingay, who currently is performing the Green Giant Shrek in Australia, all around Australia. Big, black, beautiful voice this man's got, and his love interest is Antoinette Halloran, who's a young soprano, really, who last was seen in Adelaide as the Fox in the Vixen, and previous to that was doing The Widow as well. It's a wonderful rest of the cast. Anthony Hunt, our new director, he's handsome. Anthony Hunt, our new chorus master, directs the piece. We follow that. Oh, actually, it's all right. I can show you this, can't I? This is one that we prepared earlier again from Melbourne. This is a tiny bit of the opening of Sweeney Todd. No, it's not. Okay, so it's there in all its Dickensian gore and horror, and it's a thrilling night. I defy you not to have the best time going to see Sweeney Todd. We follow that with, while we're still on the subject of blood, we follow that with our new production of Verdi's Macbeth. This is a wonderful early Verdi work that he wrote just after Nabucco, that you might know, and before he started the great middle period of La Traviata and Trovatore and Rigoletto. It stars a wonderful Australian cast, James Clayton, who many of you would have seen as the Forrester in Vixen, and Kate Ladner, a wonderful local girl who's had great success with this role, particularly in England. They're the murderous pair, the Macbeths. It's the same story, obviously. It's conducted by Oliver von Dochnany, a marvellous Czechoslovakian conductor. It's the same story as the Shakespeare, but very, very different. One of the major differences is that the witches in the night are a huge force. They are the other major character in the night, and the witches in this particular production are 18 of our chorus, so they're divided into 3 lots. It's blood and thunder Verdi at its absolute best. We add to that a couple of wonderful recitals for the year. He's cute again. And we finish up with a piece this year called The Summer of the 17th Doll, based on the great Ray Lawler original play. This is composed by a man called Richard Mills, a beautiful colleague and composer around Australia. He's the artistic director of Victorian Opera. When I came to this company, we decided that one thing that was missing around the world was presentation of Australian opera. And it was very easy for people to go down that track of desperately wanting to do something new and to build something new each year. Consequently, as soon as you build something new, something is performed, and it then usually only gets one series of performances, gets put under a bed, and everybody forgets it. So we decided that we'd go into this idea called the Lost Operas of Oz. So last year we did 3 lost operas, pieces that hadn't been performed for a long time and had only had one outing. I'm very proud to say that in the Australian newspaper at the end of last year, the Lost Operas of Oz was cited as the cultural highlight of Adelaide's year, because it's an important thing that we get out there and strut our stuff and show our own time, our own place. And Summer of the 17th Doll is one of those operas. We're bringing it to the main stage. It performs at Her Majesty's in November of this year. A glorious Australian cast, and directed by a gentleman called Joe Mitchell, who's the current artistic director of the Australasia Festival. So I can proudly say that in the Australia Council tallies of what we've done, we employed 97% of Australians in what we do. Now, that's not meant to be jingoistic, and it's certainly not meant to be overly or patronising or patriotic. What it basically is saying is that there are an extraordinary number of Australians out there on the world stage, and we have an absolute necessity and need to bring them back to literally sing for their supper. And that's something that we as an opera company are very proud of, and the fact that we will continue to fly the flag for opera in this country and in this state. We have many great South Australian singers that are overseas at the moment that we're bringing back. We have many South Australian singers, strange enough, who live here. But as I said, it's incredibly hard to make a living doing this. So the best way that we can help is by actually putting them on the stage, and the best way you can help is by just coming along and having a good time with it. So we need to change what we're doing as well and offering, and that's exactly what we're doing, trying to give people as many choices as they can to enjoy this incredible art form.
Thank you, Stuart. Now, does anyone have any questions, please? I'll just ask one to begin with. Billy's doing the Sweeney Todd. They are, right? And the second question, when will they have Aida in the Oval?
Well, yeah, Aida in the Oval. I mean, you can look down there at how glorious is that. But can you imagine how much it actually costs to fill that? You know, you can have a few people in playing a game, can maybe do it. But as soon as you put an orchestra and a choir and sound, it's a very expensive operation. Maybe one day we'll do Aida in the Oval. Let's just see how Carmina in the tennis centre goes. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How's the new theatre coming along in Grace? Could you give us a bit of an overview about that? Sure. And how it's going to suit you?
Sure. The new theatre is, for those of you that don't know, the Her Majesty's, which is a completely new theatre. They've saved the facade, and that's it. So it's on the same footprint, except for the front. The front has an extra foyer area added to it. It'll be 1,400 seats. So we'll go back to 3 tiers again, the way it used to be when it was a J.C. Williamson theatre. It's state of the art, but as I said, it's still on the same footprint, which means that it won't be a bigger stage. For us, it's the perfect size. The festival theatre is actually too big for most operas. Most operas that you would know, Barbers of Seville or Figaro or Marriage of Figaro or Carmen or any of those, were actually written to be performed usually in those beautiful Bijou Horseshoe theatres theatres in Europe, sort of 700 to 900 seats. As soon as you blow it out and do it in a 3,000-seater or 2,500-seater, it's a very different experience. And there is nothing like seeing, the murder of Gilda in Rigoletto, or the murder of Carmen at the end, up close and personal, as they say. So, and that's, one of the great things about opera. And I think probably the most exciting thing about the Madge is that it's going to have a very intimate audience-performer relationship. The pit will seat, supposedly, and we've been in there, but it's very hard to tell with hard hats, let's be honest, but it looks like it's going to fit 55 performers, which means that most of the Verdi and Puccini repertoire can be performed there, and of course the Mozarts and everything else. So it's going to be wonderful to re-energise that part of town too, because I don't know whether you feel it, but the festival theatre is getting harder and harder to get around. You can't park, you can't be dropped off. It's a really difficult experience now, I think, for people to go to the opera, and the Madge, I think, will address a lot of those issues, and you can do some great Chinese food too. Yes.
Mine's not really a question. Or maybe, perhaps
it's a statement. Oh, terrifying.
No. As you know, that most operas end in a bad way with people dying and carry on. And we all have to change. Rotary's changing, right? Can you do something and bring a doctor towards the end of all the operas and revive them? A stent, a bit of penicillin, something to revive at the end of each opera?
Look, I think it was W.H. Auden said that he couldn't possibly understand or love opera when it was clear that even if you were in the last throes of death, you were having the best time because you were singing, and you were actually, and I think that's the point, that we this is why opera still works. It's 400 years old, and you can still go and see a Handel opera or a Baroque opera, or certainly something that was performed in the 19th century, and still be delighting to be in weeping at the end of the night. Of course, there are lots of productions now where Carmen turns it on its head and kills Don José. Actually, that's not really the story. That's the bottom line. Traviata, where she does actually live at the end, but it robs you of the great joy. At the end of Bohème, for example, this man screams his heart out when Mimi has died. And the audience couldn't care less about the man that screamed. We're all rooting for the poor girl that's gone up to heaven, Mimi, and we all love, I think, the fact that we're all sort of in a darkened theatre experiencing that heightened emotion. Again, Butterfly, the last season we did, where the child is ripped away from Butterfly at the very end, is just something that you all hope desperately doesn't happen in your own lifetime. But so bring along a doctor. I love it. That's actually a good byline. We'll find a way to use it. Anybody else?
In answer to Albert's question, I think champagne might be the...
Yeah, exactly. We drink a lot of champagne.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stuart. Now you'll realise that what a wonderful artistic director we've got here now in South Australia. I encourage you all to go along, get your tickets and go along. And in thanks from the Rotary Club, we will present you with a certificate. We've made a donation to End Polio Now in your name.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.